You think you know a man by the calluses on his hands. You see a carpenter, you think of sawdust and sweat, of straight lines and honest work. You don't think of gunpowder. You don't think of the dead. But every man has a past, and some pasts have a way of crawling out of the grave, kicking and screaming. This is a story about a man like that. A man named Nathan Cross, and it's about the little girl he pulled from a raging river, a girl who would either be his salvation or his damnation. The story starts, as so many do in the Old West, with the sound of dying. The sun over the Arizona Territory in '82 was a merciless, angry God. It baked the earth until it cracked and bled dust. Nathan Cross had been riding for 3 days, chasing a ghost, a bounty that promised just enough money to disappear for good. He was a man who knew how to disappear. He crested a small hill, and that's when he heard it. It wasn't the wind, and it wasn't a coyote. It was the sound of a child's terror, thin and sharp, slicing through the oppressive heat. Down below Willow Creek, usually a lazy ribbon of water, was a churning brown monster, swollen with mountain rain. And in that monster, a little girl was being eaten alive. She couldn't have been more than 7. Her dress was a white flag of surrender against the violent current. Her dark hair fanned out around her like a drowning halo. She'd go under, vanish for a heart-stopping second, then fight her way back to the surface for one more gasp of air. Nathan didn't think. He didn't weigh the odds. The part of him that was still human, buried under years of blood and regret, took over. He spurred his horse down the embankment, a controlled slide of rock and grit. He hit the water's edge and launched himself from the saddle. The cold was a shock, a punch to the chest that stole his breath. The current grabbed him, a powerful, invisible hand trying to drag him down to hell. His boots felt like anchors. His gun belt, the tool of his trade, felt like a chain, but he fought. He swam with the powerful, desperate strokes of a man who had been fighting his whole life. He reached her just as she went under again. For a second, there was nothing but swirling, muddy water. He thought he was too late. He thought this was just one more failure to add to the long, long list. Then his fingers brushed against the thin fabric of her dress. He yanked her up, pulling her small, limp body against his chest. Her face was pale, her lips blue. He held her tight, one arm around her, the other fighting the relentless pull of the creek. He battled his way back to the bank, his muscles screaming, his lungs on fire. He finally found purchase, his boots sinking into the mud, and he dragged them both out of the water. He laid her on the ground. She wasn't breathing. He pressed his ear to her chest. Nothing. "Come on," he grunted, starting the desperate rhythm of compressions he'd learned in a war he'd rather forget. He pressed on her small chest, then breathed into her mouth, forcing his own life into her lungs. "Come on, kid. Fight!" The world was silent except for his own ragged breathing and the mocking roar of the creek. He was about to give up, to let another ghost haunt him, when she convulsed. A torrent of muddy water gushed from her mouth. She coughed, a racking, painful sound, and then she gasped, a real, life-giving breath. Her eyes fluttered open. They were the darkest brown he had ever seen, huge and terrified in her small face. She stared up at him, this stranger who had pulled her from the jaws of death. He wrapped her in his bedroll, his hands gentle. "It's all right," he said, his voice rough. "You're safe." She shivered, a violent, bone-rattling tremor. She looked around, her eyes frantic, searching for someone, for something. Then she started to cry, not with a loud wail, but with the silent, broken sobs of someone who had lost everything. "Where are your people?" Nathan asked, scanning the empty horizon. There was nothing. No wagon, no camp, no sign of life for miles. She just shook her head, tears tracing clean paths through the grime on her cheeks. "Gone," she whispered, her voice a tiny raw thing. "The bad men. There was fire." A cold knot formed in Nathan's stomach. An Apache raid, he figured. It was common enough, but there was something about this girl. Her features were fine, delicate, not like the hardy settler children he was used to seeing. "What's your name?" he asked, using his bandana to gently wipe her face. She looked confused, as if the question was a puzzle she couldn't solve. Luna, she said, the word a puff of air. I think they called me other things. That one sentence told a story of a life he didn't want to imagine. A child passed around, her own name a half-forgotten memory. He had a choice to make. He could ride to the nearest town, Broken Creek, leave her with the preacher, and get back to his business. Back to the bounty, back to the life he knew. It was the smart thing to do, the safe thing. But then he looked down at her, at the way her tiny cold fingers were clenched in the fabric of his shirt, the way those dark, lost eyes looked at him as if he were the only solid thing in a world that had just tried to wash her away. He couldn't leave her. He knew it with a certainty that shook him to his core. In that moment, saving her life wasn't enough. Now he had to save her future. All right, Luna, he said, his voice softer than he'd heard it in years. You're with me now. He didn't know it then, but in saving this one small girl, Nathan Cross had just signed his own death warrant. He had picked up a piece of a puzzle he didn't know existed, a puzzle whose other pieces were held by powerful, ruthless men. And they were coming for their property. They made a small camp as the sky bled from orange to purple. Nathan built a fire, the small flames pushing back the vast, empty darkness of the desert. He shared his jerky and hardtack with Luna, watching as she ate with a quiet, solemn hunger. The warmth of the fire and the food brought a little color back to her cheeks. She was huddled in his blanket, looking like a tiny, lost bird. She watched him with those huge dark eyes, as if trying to figure him out. Are you an angel? She asked suddenly, her voice barely a whisper. Nathan almost laughed. Him, an angel. The trail of bodies he'd left behind him stretched halfway across the territory. The men he'd killed, some deserving, some not. The darkness that clung to his soul like trail dust. No, little one, he said, poking the fire with a stick. Not an angel. As she drifted off to sleep, she curled up against his side, a small, warm weight of impossible trust. Staring into the flames, Nathan felt something shift inside him. The burning fire of vengeance that had driven him for years seemed to bank, its flames lowering to a dull glow. In its place, a different kind of fire was kindled, a protective warmth he hadn't felt since before his world had been burned to the ground, before he'd found his own wife and son lying in the ashes of his ranch. He gently searched through her wet clothes, looking for some clue, some hint of who she was, and that's when he found it. Tucked into a small, hidden pocket sewn into the hem of her dress was a locket. It was small, made of heavy tarnished silver, intricately carved with vines and flowers. This was no simple settler's trinket. This was the work of a master craftsman. It was Spanish silver, old and valuable. His fingers, clumsy and scarred, fumbled with the clasp. It snapped open. Inside there was no portrait, no tiny painted face of a mother or father. It was empty. But on the inner lid, almost too small to see, was an engraving. It wasn't a name. It was a crest, a snarling wolf's head beneath a crown. This wasn't the crest of some poor farming family. This was the mark of power, of wealth, of nobility. Who was this girl? The story she told of bad men and fire suddenly felt thin, incomplete. Apaches didn't leave behind silver lockets. He tucked the locket into his own pocket, a cold piece of metal that felt heavier than it should. He had pulled this girl from the water, but what exactly had he pulled into his life? The next day they rode. He put Luna in front of him on the saddle, her small frame wrapped in his blanket. He was heading for Broken Creek, but with a new sense of unease. He felt watched. The feeling was a familiar one, a prickle on the back of his neck that had kept him alive more times than he could count. Late in the afternoon he saw it, a glint of sunlight off something metal on a ridge a mile behind them. A spyglass. They were being followed. Nathan's mind raced. It couldn't be the law. They wouldn't be so subtle. It couldn't be for his own bounty. The men who hunted him were usually louder, more direct. This was different. This was a hunter, patient, silent, and the prey wasn't him. He urged his horse into a canter, trying to put distance between them and the watcher. He cut off the main trail, heading into a maze of canyons and arroyos he knew from his darker days. A place to lose a tail. A place to set an ambush. Luna held on, her small hands gripping the saddle horn, her face buried in his chest. She didn't cry or complain. She was just still. A stillness that spoke of a young life already filled with too much terror. As dusk fell, he found a defensible spot, a narrow box canyon with only one way in. He settled Luna behind a wall of rock with a piece of jerky and a canteen. "Stay here," he whispered. "Don't make a sound, no matter what you hear." She just nodded, her eyes wide with a fear she didn't understand. Nathan didn't build a fire. He melted back into the shadows, his rifle in his hands, his senses on fire. He was no longer a carpenter to be. He was the man he had been before, a predator. He waited. The moon rose, painting the canyon in shades of silver and black. The silence was absolute. Then a sound, the scuff of a boot on gravel. A figure appeared at the mouth of the canyon, a silhouette against the moonlight. The man moved slowly, cautiously, a pistol in his hand. He wasn't a lawman. He was a tracker, a hired gun. Nathan could tell by the way he moved, by the hungry stillness of his posture. The man scanned the canyon, his eyes searching the shadows. He was good, but Nathan was better. Nathan let him get closer, let him walk right into the kill zone. He waited until the man was just 20 yards away, a clear shot. "Looking for something?" Nathan's voice was a low growl from the darkness. The man froze. He spun, firing blindly into the rocks where he thought the voice had come from. The muzzle flash was a brief, angry flower in the dark. The bullet ricocheted with a scream. A foolish mistake. Nathan didn't fire back. He moved, silent as a ghost, circling around the man in the darkness. "Who sent you?" Nathan asked, his voice now coming from a different direction. The tracker was spooked. He fired again, another wild shot. "Show yourself!" he yelled, his voice tight with fear. "You're hunting a little girl," Nathan said, his voice cold as a grave. "That's a low line of work, even for your kind." He had him. The man was turning in circles, trying to pinpoint his location. Nathan could have ended it right there. A single shot, but he needed answers. He stepped out from behind a boulder, his own pistol leveled. "Drop it." The man saw him, his eyes widening in the moonlight. He hesitated for a second, then made his choice. He swung his gun around. Nathan fired. The shot was deafening in the narrow canyon. The tracker crumpled to the ground, a dark stain spreading on his chest. Nathan approached cautiously, his gun still raised. The man was dead. He holstered his pistol and knelt beside the body. He searched the man's pockets, looking for a clue, a name, anything. He found two things. The first was a wanted poster. The face on it was his own, younger and harder, from a lifetime ago. Nathan Cross, wanted for murder. $500 reward. The second thing made his blood run cold. It was another piece of paper, folded beneath the poster. It wasn't printed. It was a crude, hand-drawn sketch. It was a drawing of a little girl, a girl with long, dark hair and big, dark eyes. It was Luna. Underneath the sketch were words scrawled in Spanish. La Heredera, the heiress. Find her. This wasn't about an Apache raid. This wasn't a random tragedy. This little girl, this heiress, was the target. The bad men who had attacked her people weren't raiders. They were kidnappers, or assassins. And the man at his feet was just one of them. There would be more. He had just rescued a girl from a river. Now it seemed he had to rescue her from the world. Broken Creek was a mistake. He knew it the second he rode in. The town was too small, too quiet. A stranger and a child would be noticed, remembered. But they needed supplies. Luna needed proper clothes and he needed ammunition. He left Luna at the general store with the owner's wife, a kind, stout woman named Martha. He gave her a few coins and told her to buy Luna whatever she wanted. The girl's eyes went wide. It was clear no one had ever offered her such a choice. Nathan went to the saloon, not for a drink, but for information. Saloons were the nerve centers of the frontier. Bartenders heard everything. He nursed a whiskey, keeping his back to the wall, watching the room in the mirror behind the bar. A few dusty cowboys, a tired-looking gambler, a blacksmith with hands like hams. No one paid him any mind. The bartender, a man with a tired face and a dirty apron, wiped down the counter. "Passing through?" he asked, his voice flat. "Maybe," Nathan said. "Looking for work. Maybe looking to settle." The bartender grunted. "Not much work here. Silver mine petered out years ago." Nathan slid a silver dollar across the bar. A lot of money for a single whiskey. The bartender's eyes flickered to the coin, and he pocketed it. "Heard any news from the South?" Nathan asked, keeping his voice casual. "Down near the border?" The bartender leaned in a little. "Depends what kind of news you're looking for. Army's still chasing Apaches, and the Mendozas are still running things like they own the whole territory." "Mendozas?" Nathan asked, feigning ignorance. "Big cattle family," the bartender said, his voice dropping. "Spanish blood. Old money. They say Don Diego Mendoza is richer than God and twice as mean. Controls everything from here to the Mexican border. You don't cross the Mendozas." He paused, then leaned closer. "Funny you should ask. There's a rumor. Don Diego's eldest son, Ricardo, he and his family were attacked a week or so back. On the trail. The whole wagon train. Wiped out. Some say it was Apaches. Others," he trailed off, looking around nervously. "Others say it was an inside job. A dispute over land or money. The Mendozas have a lot of enemies." The pieces clicked into place with a sickening thud. The Spanish locket, the crest, La Heredera, Luna. She was a Mendoza, the granddaughter of the most powerful and most feared man in the territory. The attack on her wagon wasn't a raid or a kidnapping. It was an assassination, an attempt to wipe out an entire line of the family, and they had missed one. Nathan finished his whiskey, the cheap liquor burning a hole in his gut. This was bad, worse than he could have imagined. Don Diego would be tearing the territory apart looking for his missing granddaughter, and any man found with her would be shot first and questioned later. But then another darker thought occurred to him. What if Don Diego wasn't looking to rescue his granddaughter? The tracker had been hired by someone. The note said, "Find her." It didn't say, "Bring her home safe." What if the person who ordered the massacre was a member of the Mendoza family itself? A brother, a cousin, trying to eliminate the competition for the old man's empire. In that world, Luna wasn't a lost little girl. She was a threat, a loose end. He had to get out of this town. He had to get as far away from the Mendoza sphere of influence as possible. He had to disappear so completely that no tracker, no hired gun, no vengeful family member could ever find them. He stood up, ready to go get Luna, when the saloon doors swung open. Sheriff Miller stood there, a portly man with a sweaty face and a big silver star on his vest. He wasn't looking at the room. He was looking directly at Nathan. "Nathan Cross?" the sheriff said, his voice a little too loud. "Got a poster in my office with your name on it. I'm going to have to ask you to come with me." Behind the sheriff, two deputies appeared, shotguns held at the ready. The entire saloon went silent. Every eye was on him. Nathan's hand hovered over the butt of his pistol. He could draw. He was faster than this small-town sheriff and his farm boy deputies. He could probably take all three of them. But the general store was right across the street. A stray bullet. Luna. He couldn't risk it. Slowly, carefully, he raised his hands. "No trouble, Sheriff," he said, his voice calm. As the deputies came forward to disarm him, he caught a glimpse of movement outside the window. A man in a dusty coat, lounging across the street, saw what was happening. The man didn't look surprised. He looked satisfied. He gave a slight, almost imperceptible nod. Then he turned and walked away. It was a setup. The bartender, the casual questions, the sheriff showing up at just the right moment. The tracker he'd killed must have had a partner who had followed them to town and used Nathan's old wanted poster to get the local law to do his dirty work for him. They were trapping him. And with him out of the way, Luna would be helpless. They were marching him across the street to the jail, and he could see her through the window of the general store. She was holding a small cloth doll, her face lit up with a fragile, innocent joy. She looked up and saw him, flanked by deputies, his hands in the air. Her face crumpled. The joy vanished, replaced by the familiar terror. The doll fell from her hands. He had promised to keep her safe, and he had failed in less than a day. The jail cell was small, dark, and smelled of stale sweat and despair. Through the single barred window, Nathan could see the sun setting, casting long shadows across the dusty main street. He could see the general store, its windows now dark. He didn't know where they had taken Luna. He tried talking to Sheriff Miller, but the man was deaf to his pleas. To Miller, Nathan was just another wanted outlaw. The story of a lost girl and a vast conspiracy was nothing but a desperate lie. "You can tell it to the circuit judge when he comes through in a month," Miller had said before locking the cell door. A month. In a month, Luna would be long gone. Or worse. He paced the cell like a caged wolf. He had been in cells before, but this was different. Before, it was only his own life on the line. Now the life of that little girl was tied to his, and the rope was fraying fast. He had to get out. Hours passed. The town grew quiet. The moon rose, a pale sliver in the sky. He was sitting on the lumpy cot, his mind racing, when he heard a faint scratching sound from the window. He stood up and moved to the bars. He couldn't see anything at first. "Mister?" A small voice whispered from the darkness. He squinted. A small, shadowy figure was huddled against the wall just below the window. "Luna?" he breathed, his heart lurching. "I followed them," she whispered, her voice trembling. "I hid. Are they going to hurt you?" "No, little one, I'm okay," he lied. "But you can't be here. It's not safe." "I brought you this," she said. He saw a small hand push something through the bars. It was a piece of jerky she must have saved from her dinner. A peace offering. A sign of faith. The gesture, so small and so pure, broke something in him. "Luna, you need to listen to me," he said, his voice urgent and low. "The men who are after you, they're here, in this town. You are in terrible danger." He heard a soft gasp. "I need you to be brave," he continued. "Braver than you've ever been. I need you to go to the livery stable at the edge of town. Find my horse, a bay mare named Starlight. In my saddlebags, there's a leather pouch with money. I need you to take it, go to the stagecoach office, and buy a ticket for the first stage heading east. Go as far as you can. Don't talk to anyone. Don't trust anyone. Do you understand?" Silence. Then a quiet sob. "But what about you?" "Don't worry about me," he said, his voice harder than he intended. "I'll find you, I promise. Now go. You have to go now." He waited, holding his breath. He heard a sniffle, then the faint sound of her small feet moving away in the dust. He sank back onto the cot, his head in his hands. He had just sent a 7-year-old girl alone into the wilderness, with nothing but a few dollars and a promise he had no idea how he could keep. It was the stupidest, most reckless gamble of his life. It was also her only chance. An hour later, he heard footsteps. It wasn't the heavy tread of the sheriff. It was a lighter, stealthier sound. The lock on the main jailhouse door clicked open. Nathan was on his feet in an instant, flattening himself against the back wall of the cell, using the shadows for cover. The door creaked open. A man slipped inside. It was the man from the saloon, the bartender. In his hand, he held a ring of keys. He wasn't alone. Behind him was the man Nathan had seen across the street, the partner of the tracker he'd killed. This man had a cold, professional stillness about him, and a long, thin knife in his hand. They hadn't used the law to hold him for the judge. They had used it to hold him for the executioner. "We know the girl is with you," the second man said, his voice a sibilant whisper. "Where is she? Tell us, and your death will be quick." Nathan remained silent, letting his eyes adjust to the gloom. The bartender fumbled with the keys, his hands shaking. "Just make it fast," he muttered. "I don't want no trouble." "You'll get your money," the man with the knife said dismissively. He peered into the darkness of the cell. "Don't be a fool, Cross. There's nowhere to run." The key slid into the lock of Nathan's cell. As the lock turned, Nathan moved. He kicked the cell door with all his might. The heavy iron door flew open, slamming into the bartender, who crumpled with a cry of pain. The man with the knife jumped back, surprised by the sudden violence. That was all the opening Nathan needed. He burst out of the cell, a blur of motion. He didn't go for the killer. He went for the keys, grabbing them from the bartender's limp hand. He lunged for the gun rack on the wall, where Sheriff Miller kept his spare rifles. The killer was fast. He recovered and came at Nathan. the knife tracing a silver arc in the moonlight. Nathan twisted away, the blade slicing through his sleeve, drawing a thin line of fire along his arm. Nathan brought a rifle up like a club, smashing the stock into the man's jaw. There was a sickening crunch of bone. The man staggered back, spitting blood in a tooth. But he was tough. He came again, his eyes filled with a feral hatred. Nathan didn't have time for a protracted fight. He grabbed a box of shells, unlocked the evidence locker, and retrieved his own gun belt. As he strapped it on, the killer lunged. Nathan sidestepped, letting the man's momentum carry him past. He brought his pistol up, not to fire, but to slam the heavy barrel against the back of the man's head. The killer dropped like a sack of rocks. The bartender was moaning on the floor. Nathan ignored him. He checked his pistol, filled his pockets with ammunition, grabbed a rifle, and ran. He burst out into the silent street. The stagecoach office was dark. He prayed he wasn't too late. He ran to the livery, his boots pounding in the dust. Starlight was gone. Her stall was empty. Relief washed over him, so potent it almost buckled his knees. She had made it. She had listened. She was on her way east. Now he had to follow. He saddled the best-looking horse in the stable, a powerful black gelding. He left a stack of money on the owner's desk, more than enough to cover the cost. Then he rode out of Broken Creek, a ghost vanishing into the night. He rode east, following the stage route. He was a fugitive again, with a fresh crime to his name. But none of that mattered. All that mattered was the promise he had made to a little girl. I will find you, and Nathan Cross always kept his promises. For 6 years, the world was a blur of small towns and lonely campfires. 6 years of looking over his shoulder, of sleeping with one eye open. 6 years of being a ghost. He and Luna became masters of disappearing. They never stayed in one place for more than a few months. He took whatever work he could find, mucking stables, fixing fences, washing dishes. He used a dozen different names, a dozen different backstories. He became a father. He taught Luna to read by the light of campfires, using old newspapers and dime novels. He taught her numbers, writing her sums in the dirt with a stick. He taught her how to ride, how to track, how to shoot. Not because he wanted her to be like him, but because he wanted her to be able to survive if he wasn't there. She blossomed. The haunted, silent child vanished, replaced by a bright, curious, and fiercely loving young girl. The nightmares of fire and screaming slowly faded, replaced by the quiet security of their life on the run. She called him Papa. The first time she said it, it hit him with the force of a physical blow. It was a name he thought he would never hear again, a name that belonged to a different man, in a different life. But from her lips, it sounded like a prayer. It sounded like forgiveness. He never told her the truth about the Mendozas. In his mind, her family was the one that had tried to kill her. He was the one who had saved her. He built a new history for her, a simple story of two lonely people who found each other. It was a lie, but it was a kind lie, a lie that kept her safe. Finally, when Luna was 13, they found a place that felt like it could be home, Redemption Falls, Colorado. It was a town nestled in a high mountain valley, far from the deserts and the border politics of the South. It was a place where people came to start over. It felt right. Nathan Cross, the gunfighter, died. In his place was born Mr. Nathan, the quiet carpenter. He bought a small, rundown piece of land outside of town with the last of the money he'd stolen from the dead tracker's saddlebags. With his own 2 hands, he built a home. It wasn't much, just a small, sturdy cabin, but it was theirs. He built furniture for the townspeople, his scarred hands, once so skilled with a pistol, proving to be just as skilled with a chisel and saw. He created beauty instead of death. For 6 years, the past had remained buried. For 6 years, they had known peace. It was a beautiful lie, and it was about to come to an end. The morning it happened began like any other. Nathan was in his workshop, the scent of fresh-cut pine filling the air. He was finishing a rocking chair for the new preacher. Luna burst in, her face flushed with excitement. At 13, she was on the cusp of womanhood, with the same dark eyes he'd first seen in a panicked child's face. But now they were filled with life and laughter. Her long black hair was braided with wildflowers. "Papa, there's riders coming," she announced, her voice bright with curiosity. "A lot of them. They're coming up the valley road." Nathan's hands stilled. The old instincts, dormant for 6 years, flared to life. A cold dread washed over him. He had chosen a town called Redemption, hoping the name was a prophecy. He was about to find out it was just a name. "Stay inside, Luna," he said, his voice quiet, but with an edge she hadn't heard in years. "Lock the door behind me." "Papa? What is it?" The laughter was gone from her eyes, replaced by a flicker of fear. He didn't answer. He moved to the window of his workshop and looked down the valley. There were at least a dozen riders. They weren't cowboys or a town posse. They rode fine horses, their saddles heavy with silver. They moved with the arrogant assurance of men who believed the world belonged to them. Leading them was a man who seemed carved from stone. He was old, with a mane of silver hair and a proud, hawkish face. He wore the clothes of a Spanish grandee, a king surveying his domain. And next to him, a woman. Her face was beautiful, but hard, etched with years of bitterness and grief. Nathan's blood turned to ice. He knew that face. He had seen it in his nightmares, Isabella Mendoza. And the old man, the king on his horse, could only be one person. Don Diego Mendoza. He had run for 6 years. He had crossed 3 territories. But the past had finally run him down. "Papa!" Luna's voice was tight with panic now. She had seen his face. She knew. He turned to her, and for the first time he let himself see it. The truth he had ignored for 6 long years. The proud line of her nose, so like the old man's. The shape of her eyes, a perfect mirror of the woman on the horse. She was not Luna Cross. She was Luna Mendoza, and her family had come to collect her. "Listen to me," he said, his voice dangerously calm. "Go to your room. Pack a small bag. Go out the back window. Take your horse and ride to the hidden cave. You remember the one?" Tears welled in her eyes. "You're scaring me." "I need you to be brave," he said, kneeling in front of her, his hands on her shoulders. "They're going to say things. They're going to say, 'I stole you.' They're going to say, 'You belong to them.'" "That's not true," she cried, her voice rising. "You saved me. You're my father." The sound of hoofbeats grew louder, a drumbeat of impending doom. He pulled her into a fierce embrace, burying his face in her hair, breathing in the scent of wildflowers and sunshine. "These have been the best years of my life," he whispered. "You saved me, Luna. Never forget that." A booming voice echoed through the valley, dripping with authority and menace. "Nathan Cross, we know you are in there. Come out and face justice." "Go!" Nathan urged, pushing her toward the back of the house. "Go now, and don't come back. No matter what you hear. Promise me." "I promise," she whispered, but he saw the look in her eyes. It was a promise she had no intention of keeping. He watched her disappear. Then he turned, walked to the old chest where he kept his past locked away, and opened it. He pulled out his gun belt. The leather was supple, the holsters perfectly molded to his pistols. He strapped it on. It felt heavy. It felt familiar. It felt like coming home. He stepped onto the porch, his hands hanging loose at his sides, and faced the ghosts he had outrun for so long. "Diego," he said, his voice carrying in the still mountain air. "Been a long time." Don Diego's eyes were chips of black ice. "Not long enough, you murdering kidnapper," he snarled. "For 6 years I have hunted you. For 6 years I have mourned my granddaughter." "Your granddaughter was drowning," Nathan replied, his voice level. "I saved her life." "Liar!" Isabella shrieked, spurring her horse forward. Her face was a mask of hate. "You attacked our wagons. You murdered my husband, and you stole my child." It was true, he had attacked them, but not for a child he didn't know existed. He had come for revenge. He had come for the men who had burned his home and killed his family. "Your husband was part of the gang that murdered my wife and my son," Nathan said, the words tasting like ash. "I tracked him to your wagon train." "More lies!" Diego roared. "My son was a merchant." "Where is she?" Isabella demanded, her eyes darting toward the house. "Where is my Luna?" Nathan's silence was his answer. "She's not your daughter anymore," he said quietly. "She doesn't remember you. I've raised her. I've loved her. I gave her a life." "You had no right!" Isabella screamed. "And what right did you have?" Nathan shot back, his own anger finally breaking through. To raise her in a family of killers and thieves? I taught her right from wrong. I taught her that you solve problems with your head, not your gun. Diego laughed, a harsh, ugly sound. You, a man who lives by the gun, speak of right and wrong? Today, justice will be served. He drew his pistol. Around him, a dozen other pistols were drawn, a dozen hammers cocked. Nathan stood alone on his porch, a carpenter against a king's army. But just as the tension reached its breaking point, a new sound echoed up the valley. The thunder of more horses riding hard. A posse. Riding at their head was Sheriff Elias Thorne, the Law and Redemption Falls. He was a good man, a fair man. For 6 years, Thorne had treated Nathan with a cautious respect. Hope, fragile and unexpected, bloomed in Nathan's chest. Thorne and his men reined in their horses, forming a line between Nathan and the Mendozas. Diego Mendoza, Thorne said, his voice calm and steady. I'm Sheriff Thorne. This is my jurisdiction. Diego sneered. Your jurisdiction is irrelevant. This is family business. Not anymore, Thorne said. He reached into his coat and pulled out a piece of paper, an official document bearing the seal of the territorial governor. I have here a legal writ. It recognizes the claim of the Mendoza family to one Luna Mendoza, believed to be in the custody of Nathan Cross. The world tilted under Nathan's feet. Thorne wasn't here to save him. He was here to enforce the law. Nathan, Thorne said, and for the first time Nathan heard a note of pity in the sheriff's voice. It's over. Hand over the girl. Betrayal was a cold, sharp knife in his gut. The town he had chosen, the peace he had built, the law he had come to respect. It was all a lie. They were siding with the powerful, with the money, with the men who had come to tear his world apart. One of Diego's nephews, a young man with a cruel smirk, spurred his horse forward. See, Cross? Your time is up. We'll take the girl, and then we'll finish the job we should have finished with your wife. He spat on the ground. She screamed real pretty, you know. Begged for her life. An audible gasp went through the sheriff's posse. The world went silent for Nathan. The young man's words. The detail about his wife. It was something only one of the killers could have known. It wasn't just Isabella's husband. It wasn't just a few hired hands. It was all of them. The whole family. Diego had ordered the hit on his family to steal his land. Land that stood in the way of his expanding empire. The revenge he had taken all those years ago hadn't been enough. He had only killed a branch. The root of the evil was standing right in front of him. Sheriff, Nathan said, his voice dropping to a terrifying whisper, his eyes never leaving Diego's. You're a man of the law. You just heard a confession to the murder of my family. What are you going to do about it? Thorne looked flustered, his eyes darting between Nathan, the sneering nephew, and the legal writ in his hand. The law was the law, but justice was something else entirely. Diego saw his hesitation. Enough of this farce, he bellowed. Take the girl, kill the man. And with that, the world exploded into gunfire. Nathan didn't dive for cover. He moved like lightning. His pistols were in his hands before the first of Diego's men could even fully raise his own. 2 shots, so close together, they sounded like one. 2 men toppled from their saddles. He was no longer a carpenter. He was a storm of focused violence, a whirlwind of death. He moved across the porch, using the post for cover, his guns bucking in his hands. Every shot was a kill. The years of peace hadn't dulled his skills. They had only honed his focus. Sheriff Thorne and his posse were caught in the crossfire, confused. Their orders were to take a girl, not to participate in a massacre. They scattered, seeking cover, their loyalty torn between the law and the brutal reality unfolding before them. Diego roared in fury, firing his own pistol wildly. Isabella screamed, her face a mask of terror and rage. But Nathan wasn't fighting a dozen men. He was fighting one. He moved with a singular purpose, cutting a path through the Mendoza riders, his eyes locked on the old man. A bullet tore through his shoulder, spinning him around. He grunted in pain but didn't fall. He returned fire, dropping the man who shot him. Another bullet grazed his temple, and warm blood streamed down his face. He was outnumbered. He was wounded. He couldn't last. Then a new sound, a high-pitched crack from the hills above the cabin. One of the Mendoza men, who had a clear shot at Nathan's back, suddenly stiffened, a look of surprise on his face. He looked down at the small, neat hole that had appeared in his chest, then slid silently from his saddle. All eyes turned toward the hills. There, standing on a rocky outcrop, was Luna. She held the small caliber rifle Nathan had taught her to use. Smoke curled from its barrel. Her face was pale, set in a mask of grim determination. She was terrified, but she was not hiding. She was not a victim. She was her father's daughter. "Luna!" Isabella screamed, a strange mix of horror and something else. Greed. While everyone was distracted, Isabella spurred her horse, not toward Nathan, but toward the hills, toward Luna. "The locket!" she shrieked, her voice thin and mad. "Give it to me! It's mine!" In that moment, the truth crashed down on Nathan with the force of a physical blow. Isabella didn't want her daughter. She wanted the locket, the empty locket with the family crest. It wasn't just a piece of jewelry. It had to be a key to a safe, a vault, to a fortune she was willing to kill her own family for. The attack on the wagon train 6 years ago, it was starting to look very different. What if Isabella had arranged it herself to get rid of her husband and gain control of his inheritance, using Nathan's quest for vengeance as the perfect cover? Diego had heard it too. He stared at his daughter, his face a canvas of dawning horror and betrayal. His own child had plotted against him. That hesitation was all Nathan needed. He ignored his wounds, pushed through the pain, and charged. He fired his last 2 shots, not at Diego, but at the men flanking him. He crashed into Diego's horse, grabbing the old man and pulling them both from the saddle. They hit the ground hard. Nathan's world exploded in a flash of pain as his wounded shoulder hit the earth. Diego was strong for his age. He fought like a cornered wolf, his hands clawing for Nathan's throat. "You took everything from me," Diego roared, his face inches from Nathan's. "You started this," Nathan growled back, struggling to bring his empty pistol up to use as a club. "You killed my family. For what? A little more land?" Meanwhile, Sheriff Thorne had seen enough. The confession, Isabella's madness, Nathan's raw, righteous fury. The legal writ in his pocket felt like a lie. "This is not justice," he bellowed to his men. "The Mendozas are murderers. Side with me, for redemption falls." The posse, finally given a clear choice between right and wrong, chose right. They opened fire on the remaining Mendoza riders, who were now caught between the law and the deadliest gunfighter they had ever seen. As the battle raged, Isabella reached Luna. She scrambled up the rocks, her fine clothes tearing, her face wild. "Give it to me, you little brat!" she screamed, grabbing for the silver locket around Luna's neck. Luna, terrified, stumbled backward. The small rifle fell from her hands. Isabella snatched the locket, breaking the chain. She held it up, her eyes gleaming with triumph. But as she turned to flee, she lost her footing on the loose rock. She screamed, a long, terrible sound that was cut abruptly short as she tumbled from the outcrop, falling onto the rocks below. Down in the yard, the fight was over. The surviving Mendozas had fled or surrendered. Nathan stood over Diego, his pistol pressed to the old man's temple. Diego looked up, his eyes broken. He had lost his son, his granddaughter, his daughter, and his empire, all in a single morning. He was just a defeated old man. Nathan looked at him, the man who had destroyed his life. He saw the face of his murdered wife, his son. The fire of vengeance that had burned in him for so long flared, demanding one last sacrifice. He could pull the trigger, end it, fulfill the promise he had made to their ghosts. Then he heard a voice. "Papa?" He looked up. Luna was standing there, her face streaked with tears and dust, looking down at the scene of carnage. At him. In her eyes, he didn't see a hero. He didn't see a savior. He saw a man holding a gun to another man's head. He saw the violence he had tried so hard to protect her from. The fire of vengeance died, smothered by a love that was stronger than any hate. He lowered the gun. "It's over," he said, his voice ragged. He turned his back on Diego Mendoza and walked toward his daughter. The aftermath was messy. Sheriff Thorne arrested Diego and the surviving Mendoza men. The territorial government would spend years untangling the family's web of crime and murder. The story of the gunfight at the carpenter's cabin became a local legend. Nathan Cross, the wanted murderer, became Nathan Cross, the man who saved Redemption Falls. Sheriff Thorne, using his newfound authority and the town's unwavering support, sent a telegraph to the governor. He told the whole story, a story of murder, betrayal, and a father's love. The old wanted poster was torn up. Nathan's past was wiped clean, on one condition: he was bound to the town. His redemption was his cage, but it was a cage he gladly accepted. A few months later, on a quiet afternoon, Nathan sat on his porch, his arm in a sling, sanding the rocking chair he had started on that fateful morning. Luna came and sat beside him. She was quiet for a long time, watching his hands work. "They found what the locket was for," she said softly. "It was a key to a bank box in Santa Fe. It had deeds, land grants, proof that Diego stole land from my other father." Nathan stopped sanding. He looked at her. "She wanted it all," Luna continued, her voice small. "Isabella, she planned the whole thing years ago. She used your revenge to get rid of her husband so she could claim his share. She wanted me back only because I was the key." She held up her hand. In it was the silver locket, dented and tarnished. "The sheriff gave it to me. He said it's mine, that the fortune is mine." Nathan didn't say anything. He just watched her. She looked at the locket, at the snarling wolf crest, the symbol of a family built on blood and greed. Then she stood up, walked to the forge where Nathan heated his tools, and, without a word, dropped it into the glowing coals. They watched together as the silver blackened, warped, and melted, losing its form until it was nothing but a shapeless, glowing lump. A past erased by fire. She came back and sat beside him, leaning her head on his good shoulder. "My name is Luna Cross," she said quietly, but with a strength that made his heart swell with pride. "And I'm home?" Nathan put his arm around her, pulling her close. The sun was setting, painting the valley in hues of gold and rose. The scent of pine was in the air. It was quiet. It was peaceful. It was real. A man and his daughter, sitting on the porch of the home they had built and fought for. A family not of blood, but of choice. A family forged in water and tested by fire, and finally at peace. If this story of redemption and a love that conquered all moved you, do us a favor and absolutely destroy that like button. Make sure you subscribe and ring that notification bell, because you won't want to miss the incredible stories we have coming up. And we want to hear from you in the comments. At the end, Nathan chose not to kill Diego. Did he make the right choice? Was that true justice? Or should he have finished his revenge? Let us know your thoughts below. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next one.